Why does this not?
I really like the guy.
Yeah, we might have it in.
Does it need, or will these things not turn on?
Until I hit the big button.
Oh,
The voice actor.
we need to get some kind of a shade.
That needs to be darker. We had the windows in and it should be reflecting, but we need that one at least to be darker. If you keep those painted in here, it's a little brighter. We can bring those maps back up there.
Don't you want to be in the?
Spotlight right on you, man. You did that on purpose.
Shades.
No.
Sure. Number one. Someone had one on my chair, so I don't. Reply, you're a wrong person. Fine. There's a little, on the right hand side, a little knob, push it in. Oh. You gotta move it back and forth. Push all the way through.
Also that heat in, isn't it? I'm always afraid that over.
Yeah.
I would have thought it would
Fix
be.
everything around here.
Fans.
Maybe.
That's more comfortable. There, because.
Now your back is also.
People. He's the one.
I think that's it. Thank you, sir. Oh my God, it's heat.
There's nothing.
I'm scared. I think this next study, he said, it's third time we good. I need to stop.
I'm gonna give you 5 stars on the other page. It's on you, man.
Okey dokey, it is 6:30 PM, August the 7th, we will open the meeting. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
The United States of America, and its new republic, for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
Rise you on and saying, now we're going to say the Texas. Oh, no, start practice.
Not unless we put it up on the screen.
Public school, you have to say. So I used to know.
I do too, because every meeting I go to, we say.
Oh, there you go.
Uh-huh. I went through a period that there's just enough commonality here that it goofed me up on both of them for a while. Okay, is there anyone here in the public participation that is not here to speak on the agenda item?
I did not receive anything.
Okay. Okay, approval of the minutes. Are there comments, changes that need to happen?
I didn't see anything either.
Okay, may I have a motion?
The motion to approve minutes has been.
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. Okay. Now, item number 1 is discuss and make a recommendation regarding a preliminary plat for 461.858 acres of property situated in the Pinson Wild Survey, abstract number 1339, and the A.M. Feltus Survey, abstract number 1595, in the Western Extraterritorial Jurisdiction, ETJ, of the town of Bartonville, Denton County, Texas. The property is located generally east of State Highway 377, between Keith Road and Smooch Lane. The applicant is Old WR Ranch. Don't know what that I is.
Is it a one? That's one. Yeah.
Packer LP, Town of Bartonville, file number PP 2024-002. Staff,
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm gonna take just maybe 2 minutes before I pass this over to Ryan to discuss some of the changes that have occurred over the last several years since First Ranch first started, or Mr. First started looking at developing the property. Laws have changed on annexation through the years. Specifically, in 2017, restricted the municipal annexation process, authorizing municipal residents to vote on whether a city should annex out areas outside of its limits. In 2019, removed involuntary annexation completely, so the town could no longer, as a general law, we didn't have that authority either. But it basically stopped all non-voluntary annexations. You could basically stay in the ETJ forever unless there was an agreement. And again, that's something along those lines is what was utilized on the Tour 18 property when there was an agreement between Bartonville and Flower Mound for Bartonville to de-annex that area, and Flower Mound to annex that area, and they actually paid for that right to do so. And then in 2023, basically that really changed the game. Property owners can de-annex from the city's ETJ with a simple petition. So again, Heinz Development comes to the town they had the ability to do such a thing and de-annex and not engage the town in any processes. But they've chosen to go through this process, and they've negotiated with town council to agree to not connect to town streets, as well as create a 30-foot landscape buffer between this development and town limits. So again, that's some of the knowledge. I know a lot of people have been here for quite some time, and we're just playing a different game now because state legislature has continued to change the annexation laws that impact whether or not, again, Flower Mound had no interest in annexing this area. So again, that just didn't work. It was not going to be the same situation as we engaged with Heinz this time around. So that's what brings us here today. It's not, we don't have anything against Heinz or the development. It's just not the nature of Bartonville to pursue such large developments. But again, we've engaged with Heinz and they've engaged with us in the ETJ to do this process. Right.
All right, with that, I'll be giving the staff presentation on the review of the preliminary. So this project is called High Plains at First Ranch. Town of Bartonville project number PP 2024-002. Okay, great. So this preliminary plat was prepared to create 1,115 single-family residential lots and 35 non-residential lots. 34 of those lots are open space lots, generally for either parks or utilities or drainage features. And then one of the lots was identified as a mixed-use lot, which will be further kind of designed in the future, just kind of a reserve lot at this time. As Thad mentioned, this property is located in the Bartonville ETJ on the west side of town. The project includes provisions for a public street system, public water, and public sewer service for all the parcels, none of which, of course, are provided by or connected to the town of Bartonville's system. The total project area is 461.858 acres, again, the western Bartonville ETJ. Currently, the project is comprised of 5 original tracts and is located east of Highway 377 between Keith Road and Smooth Lane. Now, back in 2002, town of Bartonville and Denton County signed an interlocal cooperation agreement, which is authorized by the Texas Local Government Code, which basically assigns the jurisdiction or the authority to regulate subdivisions to Bartonville. In those cases where there's potential for 2 government jurisdictions to have authority to regulate subdivisions, whether it be the county or the town or a city, in the ETJ of said municipality. An interlocal cooperation agreement have straightens out those authorities. So you don't have two entities kind of trying to do the same job and tripping over each other. So again, way back in 2002, the interlocal agreement was prepared and created, giving Bartonville that subdivision regulation authority. However, in the ETJ of the town, you actually don't have any zoning authority. So as we review this preliminary plat, be aware that the scope of our review is very limited. And it explicitly does not provide any authority to assign any zoning regulations, be it setbacks, density, lot coverage, or anything like that. The county continues to review OSSF, meaning the on-site septic facilities or septic systems, culvert permits and development permits. So our scope is solely limited to the subdivision review and assignment of the regulations that apply to that. We also can't regulate use, building size, or number of buildings on any particular lot. So again, none of those land use or zoning regulations apply to the ETJ, which candidly does make subdivision review a little bit challenging because it ends up purely being a technical review rather than a application of any of the town's strict regulations that we would apply if we had a subdivision within the town limits. So this preliminary plat has 1,150 lots to be created over 5 phases. The phasing plan wasn't explicit, but generally there's an assumption that phases 1 and 2 will be first, and then 3, 4, 5 down the road. The application included a preliminary drainage layout, a portion of which is shown on the right side of the screen, just to show you kind of, that's even just a very small part of the whole project. There's also a preliminary pad grading plan, which shows the finished floor and finished pad elevations of all of the lots, which will come into play further in this presentation as we talk about flooding and floodplain. There's also a preliminary water layout showing the general location of the water lines, as well as sewer. And then there was a flood study that the applicant prepared at the town's request for the portion of White's Branch that goes through the property. If you look at the figure there, the subject property is basically the area in the dark brown right in the middle. And you can see that as depicted in green, there's a portion of floodplain that goes through the kind of southeastern portion of the project. And so there's a key relationship between the flood area and the residential lots that did come into play as we were reviewing the preliminary plat. So as I mentioned, some of the standard approval criteria that we find in our development ordinance don't really apply to this type of review because it's in the ETJ. And so we had to kind of narrow our review to some of the more technical and structural requirements that you find in any plat. So for example, criteria number 1 related to a land study or other studies and plans wasn't applicable. Criteria 2, which is from again our Bartonville development ordinance, asks that the layout of required public improvements and town utilities have been approved by the town engineer. We aren't going to be reviewing the civil plans for this project, so it was just the preliminary layouts that were reviewed. However, those layouts were provided, and through the preliminary plat review, we did identify some things that needed to be addressed through recommended conditions of approval, which I'll lay out at the end of this presentation. And once again, not in Bartonville jurisdiction nor tied to any of our Bartonville systems. Criteria 3 is whether it conforms to applicable zoning, other regulations. As I mentioned earlier, there's no zoning in the ETJ or in the county, so that's not applicable. And then number 4 was whether there was a review for on-site sewage facilities. That's usually the case here in Bartonville. There's not much that has any sewer service. But in this case, this project in the ETJ is going to tie into a sewer service, and so there's no OSSF review or considerations in this regard. Now, in the interlocal agreement that I mentioned earlier, there was also a reference to Texas Local Government Code Section 212, which is the subdivision rules and regulations at the state level that grant authority to towns and cities to regulate subdivisions. And within that, there are a number of criteria that are referenced that are also granted to cities to consider when reviewing plats. Now, most of the time, the city's own or the town's own approval criteria are sufficient to cover that. But because this doesn't have the same level of applicability to our local Bartonville development ordinance, we took the time to actually go back to look at those the Texas local government code criteria and make sure that those were being considered as well in this review. So for example, number one was whether the plat conforms to the general plan of the municipality and its current and future streets, alleys, parks, playgrounds, and public utility facilities. And somewhat similarly, criteria number two was that it conforms to the general plan for the extension of the municipality and its roads, streets, and public highways within the municipality and in the ETJ. So in short, the key thing that we looked at here was that as presented, you can see the figure on the left shows the road layout. None of these roadways connect to any of Bartonville's roads. And that was one of the key points of negotiation between the town and Hines early on in the process. And so we basically reviewed to verify that the roadway was not going to be connected. In addition, we also verified that the streets within this project are going to be maintained by a municipal utility district and not the county. And it's also going to be streets that have curb and gutter. And so that has a certain design element to it that it isn't going to be like country roads with bar ditches and roadside drainages. It's going to be a more urban style level of stormwater management within the roads. But again, that's all going to be maintained by the MUD. And again, there's also 34 open space lots, which presumably are going to provide some level of open space recreation and parks facilities. Not something that we would regulate, or something that we would review explicitly as part of this plat review. Criteria 3 from the local government code is asking whether there's a bond. Again, because this is not something that is in our municipal boundary, we wouldn't have any authority to require said bond. Number 4 is that it conforms to any other rules adopted under 212.002. And here's where I found a key reference that we looked a little bit further into as well. And that is that the plat should promote, the subdivision should promote the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the municipality and the safe, orderly, and healthful development of the municipality. So taking those terms and looking back at our own subdivision standards, there were a few key things that led to our ability to assign some recommended conditions of approval to make sure that the subdivision, while not in the town's municipal boundary, still maintained a high level of professional accuracy, that it accounted for the needs of the residents of the subdivision. And so this general welfare clause is something that we tapped into to identify and assign those conditions. So some of the key things that we identified in the subdivision itself that related to the promoting the health, safety, morals, and general welfare were that we wanted to make sure that the preliminary water, sewer, and drainage layouts adequately provided the necessary utilities to all of the lots within the subdivision. One of the things we did identify that actually came out of the pre-application meeting that we held with the development team a number of months ago was that there was no clear provision of a secondary access point to the subdivision, which is a requirement of the International Fire Code as well as the Bartonville Development Ordinance. So as a condition of approval, we're recommending requiring that secondary access point for emergency response at the very beginning. At full build out, there will naturally be 2 access points, but in the phases 1 and 2, there's no clear secondary access point. So that's going to be something they're going to need to figure out. We already did get a preliminary response, and maybe they can answer to that in their presentation. But that's an important aspect to maintain a high level of safety for the residents in the early stages of the project. And then we also just noticed that there were some missing easements for utility crossings where there might be a sewer line going through a residential lot. There needs to be an easement there to protect both the property owner as well as that utility in the long term. There was also the need for a flood study to be prepared to identify the base flood elevation in the case of a 100-year flood, and the relationship of that base flood elevation to the finished floor elevations of all the graded lots adjacent to that floodplain. So Denton County has floodplain standards, in the city, the town of Bartonville has floodplain standards that require the graded lot to basically be 2 feet higher than the 100-year flood elevation. So that basically, if you have a big flood, you're not gonna get water coming into those residential lots. And so the provision of this flood study allowed us to review their grading plan and verify that all of those lots are at least 2 feet above that flood elevation, which we have confirmed. So we appreciate that, they're providing that information. And there's one condition of approval in here that they would have to file what's called a letter of map revision or a LOMAR, which is something they file with FEMA, that they take the data that they collected with this flood study, they file it with FEMA, and FEMA update their official records to reflect the data that the team prepared. One other thing that we identified, and this is just a minor thing, but it's important when we're looking at safety of vehicular circulation. We have a section in our development ordinance that limits the ability to have street offsets less than 300 feet. So if you have street offsets that are really close, but they're not completely opposite one another, like a 4-way intersection, there's an increase in the number of conflict points that you're gonna have with turning movements due to those offsets. And so you can see on the right side, there's a street offset of about 140 feet or so between 2 residential local streets. And knowing that our code prohibits those offsets, that was pointed out. So these are Marigold Trail and Peppervine Lane. However, the Bartonville Development Ordinance in section 1 actually does allow for a waiver process. And so as part of the packet that you have before you, they did submit a formal waiver request that would ultimately be either granted or denied by the town council. That waiver would allow the street offset to basically persist as it is. I would say professionally, given the relatively low amount of traffic that these 2 streets are bound to generate, it's probably not the worst situation, but still, a strict application of the development ordinance would prohibit this offset from occurring. And so if that waiver were not granted by town council, then there's a condition, a recommended condition of approval that would require them to realign one or the other of the streets to create a true 4-way intersection or increase to more than 300 feet for that offset. So with those review points in mind, staff do recommend approval with conditions of the preliminary plat for High Plains at First Ranch, with the following recommended conditions of approval. These conditions, it's at the pleasure of the planning and zoning commission to maintain these conditions, add conditions, remove conditions, or alter conditions as you see fit, with any motion that you would present to the town council as your recommendation. So condition number 1 is that it would require a minimum of a 15-foot public utility easement anywhere there's a water or sewer utility traversing a lot. So again, there were a couple cases in those preliminary water and sewer layouts where there didn't appear to be utility easements on the lots, covering and protecting those utility crossings. And those were listed in items A through G here on condition 1. Condition 2 is that they would be required to add a 10-foot wide utility easement located along the front of the property lines against all right of way. Now, these utility easements are different than the water and sewer easements. These are basically franchise utility easements. So your electrical, your telecom, your gas, your cable, those utilities that go to each house to provide the franchise services that we all enjoy, those need a dedicated space on the property to protect the installation of the utility, to allow the installation, therefore, and the preliminary plat didn't show those standard 10-foot utility easements. That is a requirement in our development ordinance. It's something that we are asking them to maintain. Condition 3 is that the final plat needed to show Marigold Trail and Peppervine Lane meeting as a 4-way intersection. That was that offset issue that we talked about. But I do make a point that will only be a recommendation if the waiver that they submitted is not granted by town council. Condition 4 is requiring a second access point from State Highway 377 for emergency services. Until such time as another permanent secondary access road, for example, Street A, which is on the south side of the project, is completed. Condition 5 is that in the preliminary sewer layout, there was and this is an easy mistake to make, but there was actually a section of sewer that was kind of didn't connect to the greater sewer system. And so it's just a matter of finding the right grade and connecting that so that you have a gravity sewer system throughout the whole project. And not something that doesn't actually connect to the overall transmission system. Condition 6 is that on the final plat, there's an existing 20-foot wide water easement coming from the north. And it just needs to be stated that that water easement is by this plat, showing that it's being established through the action of recording the plat and not something that's already there. Item 7 is that on the final plat, there needs to be a new note 7, which reads that all parcels ending X, with the exception of lot 48, lot 1X, which is that mixed use lot that I talked about at the very beginning, are open space parcels to be owned and maintained by the HOA. That could be the mud instead, but I believe the HOA is probably the acceptable body there. These parcels will be encumbered with a public access and utility easement over their entirety. The reason that this is important is that one, it identifies those as open space parcels, and two, those are generally gonna be those parcels that will be used for outdoor recreation and parks. So you need to have access on those, and three, the utility easement is important because there are a number of cases where those water and sewer easements are going over those lots. And just having a blanket utility easement over them is the easiest way to make sure that those are allowed to be on those properties. And finally, the last three recommended conditions. Number 9 is that a letter of map provision or a LOMAR needs to be submitted to FEMA for the revised zone AE floodplain. So again, they did a study of White's Branch that identified the base flood elevation and the floodplain boundary. That information needs to go to FEMA and they'll update their formal records through this LOMAR process. Number 10, the final plat needs to contain a signature block, which I actually realized after I submitted this that they did give me a signature block, but on a different page than I was expecting. So that's actually taken care of. And then finally, number 11, there's just one minor typo that needs to be corrected in the owner's certification and legal description. So that concludes my presentation on this. I'm happy to take any questions now.
And by the way, he looks at the subdivision inside town just as thoroughly, so.
That's good. This number 10 then should be scratched off here as far as staff
Yeah.
recommendation.
For the sake of completeness, I wanted to mention it because it is in your staff report, but I would request that if there is a recommendation with conditions that you just state that condition 10 will be struck from their list.
Before we go any further, and this is just me personally, I love the name High Plains at First Ranch. It sounds Texan and it sounds country instead of mountain meadow or something that nobody in Texas has ever seen. So good job, whoever did that. At this point, would you like to come up and is everything covered, or do you have stuff you'd like to share with us?
No, yeah. We can definitely add some extra color, but my name is Jason Weaver. I'm with GM Civil. I'm the project civil engineer. My address is 2559 Southwest Grapevine Parkway in Grapevine. Really from Brian's presentation and what that put in color, not a lot to add to it. Obviously they covered a lot of the topics that I would have addressed with the mud and the interlocal agreement and everything that they just laid out there. But honestly, from the conditions that Ryan's laid out, we don't have any issue with those. Obviously, we did submit one waiver request for that one offset intersection. We provided some standards for some other cities that are close in proximity from Justin, Fort Worth, Keller, that had similar offset restrictions, but for residential local streets, those generally fall in the 125 to 135 range. For the 300 foot is more for collector roads and arterial road intersections where they want those offsets for traffic flow and consideration. So that was part of what our justification was to ask for that waiver request. So we, basically, hopefully you'll be able to decide favorably for that. But other than that, Hines, which is this agreement with Hines, they're obviously partnered with the First Family on this project. So, it kind of going into your statement you made, Madam Chair, you know, that they have a legacy that they want for the property, and so the naming, the themes, the amenities that are going into this, there's a lot of thought that's being taken into it. You know, they want as a family to have something that's sitting there and that they're proud of. You know, and that the town can be proud of, you know, as far as being adjacent to it, and with the least impact you guys. So obviously with the mud being established, you know, we're taking care of all the responsibility for maintenance for water, sewer, drainage, paving. You know, there's no obligation for the city to take care of that. We have had conversations with the ESD relative to emergency access to the property. Because one of the points where the town and ESD kind of did diverge was that access really coming from the eastern side of our property, the western side of Bartonville, from Jeter Road specifically, just for their response time. Because there isn't a good path to get to the property there. But we've recently had conversations with ESD, with Liberty Christian School as well, and so they're the ESD is actually trying to obtain the rights at the end of Glenview Court, which is a cul-de-sac that butts up right to Liberty Christian, to have a fenced gate that's just for emergency purposes only, that has a lock on it that the fire department can access to go through the school to be able to get into the backside. And that's just if there's an accident on 377, you know, that's their main concern right now. But obviously as development occurs, you know, the first family owns everything to the south to 1171. So as Ryan and Dad mentioned, we're gonna have multiple points of access over time, you know, where they'll be able to come in the backside from 1171 and come up in either direction. So I think in the interim, that's just one of the things that they're looking at until such time as the development goes south, right? And the Liberty Christian School was amenable to it. We're basically gonna have another gate that connects to their private road that's on the south side of one of our cul-de-sacs. It'll have the same type of connectivity to it, so it's not a thoroughfare for public use. You know, it's gonna be a locked gate, you know, fence that'll look nice, you know, so they want a tall fence that it doesn't change the look of what's there today. This is the ESD saying what their approach is for this, so. So I think we're making good progress on that, and so that way we can have a safe environment for the people that do live in this development. Other than that, I really don't have too much more to add. I think you know, like I said, the presentation was very concise and you covered everything. So other than that, I'm just here to answer questions, and Mr. Greer has something else to add.
I don't know, stole my thunder. Okay.
I do have a question, backing up to the fire department issue. Was I understanding you correctly that this is really being looked at from the standpoint of until the rest of the phases are there and a fire department is built down there, this would only be, well, I don't know how short term it is,
Right.
but relatively short term, is that what I was understanding?
That's the intent. I mean, we have been in talks with them about another fire station somewhere within the property. We don't know where that may be yet. But that's definitely something that Hines and the first have been talking with ESD about. So obviously response time would be totally different there, right? And the need for maybe having, you know, to have that station respond to the High Plains First Ranch, and they're right there off of 377 or south further, however it may be. But yes, that'd be the intent. And so right now with ESD from phase one, we will obviously have a road that we're gonna build through the Argyle ETJ right up to 377, which is our main thoroughfare. But then Smoot Lane, which is the gravel road that cuts through the property right now that, you know, everybody uses in that area for driving on. The ESD's looked at it, they're fine. We're gonna have a gravel connection that ties there with an easement that will be needed for phase one, so that they have 2 points of access from day one that don't include the other emergency access potentially that goes through Liberty Christian School.
So that access, the Liberty access, would only be considered if a fire happened. They wouldn't automatically go up Glenview, they would go take Smoot.
Ryan, do you mind going back to the map?
Yeah, sure. So if you have that, if you want to address that, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, here's probably fine. So There's a private road on Liberty Christian that I'm sure y'all are aware of, fire lane that goes kind of, basically follows this property line and then kind of jogs up to the north right there. Where we're talking about, this obviously emergency access only gate, is right here at the end of that cul-de-sac. And the only reason that that would ever be used is if there's a wreck on 377 where 377 gets completely shut down and the fire department is not able to come down and then across on Smoot here. We're building a temporary gravel,
All weather road.
yeah, all weather road, from Smoot here coming parallel to our property line. And that will be, unless, once in a 50-year event happens and 377 is completely shut down, that would be the only use for that access, so.
So I can.
Sure.
Okay.
So once you build the temporary access
Yes.
for these emergencies, then it's there forever. Can it be removed later so that it's not actually there forever and ends up being open and being a street years down the road?
Sure, yeah, so 2 points on that. So one is the only way that that would be removed, from the fire department's perspective, I'm kind of speaking for the ESD here. But that would be removed once the eventual connection down south to 1171 occurs. Because then they have, if 377 is shut down or if 1171 is shut down, they still have a way to get up through the subdivision either way. And then the second point, and I want to make this extremely clear. This, when we say gate, it's not, there is not a code on it that you can figure out. There will be signs on it that say emergency access only. It'll have the ESD logo on it. It's a Knox box system where, yeah, I don't know honestly exactly how they work, but strictly for fire department use. So
The fire department can get through Knox boxes, even PD doesn't even have access, police department does not have access to Knox boxes.
that's correct.
Right, but my point is that that's great, but then years down the road, people vote that out, and now they're just take the gate out and it's an open road and we didn't end
The
up.
only way the town would potentially consent is if we had a three-party agreement between Bartonville, Liberty Christian and Hines. So again, this is something being discussed very preliminarily. I know the ESD has their desires to solve a non-Bartonville problem through Bartonville, but we are adamant that we protect the people on Glenview. And again, the reason that gate is up there 8 feet tall and not climbable is because people were going down to either Glenview, letting their kids off into Liberty Christian and upsetting that residential neighborhood years ago. So again, that we, through an agreement, we could set the standard of what will be there. We could set the standard of what would be maintained there and what the conditions under which that would be accessed. We could also put in a clause that, again, that access would be eliminated or go away once this was connected to 1171. Is that correct, Ed? That
We
is
have that go away, because I'm seeing, okay, what if 377 is under construction? What if, I'm just trying to work, what if some event happens in there? And now they wanna, the fire department needs more access, this is just not enough, that just automatically becomes a street.
Yeah, no, I think, just for what Pat said, I think we can put all those conditions in there and that stuff can, once those connections are created, then that goes away. Yeah.
So isn't the intention of the owners to eventually get this developed up with the property that temporary road is gonna be on anyway?
Going south? Yes, no, 100%. So obviously you're just looking at the snapshot that's in the Bartonville ETJ, but the first ranch development is still within Flower Mound. I mean, there's, other mixed use components. There's basically where Canyon Falls intersects with 377. There's gonna be another big arterial road that loops through and ties down to 1171. So there'll be another big arterial road that's, 4 lanes, whatever it may be, that does that this will then spur off, which actually you kind of see on the southern side of our site where the mixed use lot will be in the southwest corner. That's preliminarily where that road actually kind of wraps from, Canyon Falls and then turns south, to 1171. So we're still working with the first family in the town of Flower Mound on that alignment. So it may change a little bit, but generally speaking, it's coming off of, Canyon Falls and heading due southeast, to tie into 370 or 1170. So.
How does the construction of 377 match up with your subdivision?
Right, so obviously, we're gonna be under construction before they start their expansion, so. We're obviously gonna be connecting with TxDOT. We're gonna be putting our decel lanes in, right and left turn lanes in on the existing asphalt section that's there today, so we'll be widening that out. But obviously, they're gonna come through and, whenever that may be, if it's 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and it'll become a curb and gutter divided thoroughfare section there, right? With a bridge that goes over 1171 and everything, so there will obviously be some, construction activity and access stuff that goes on with it. But, depending on how well this development goes and, like I said, it's hard to say what the market will require here, right? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of interest from builders and stuff that they've been talking to. So there's a good chance that that connection to the south occurs a lot quicker than what we think, so.
Is that part of first operation, those big, what look like sewer pipes that are 377?
So that is-
Property,
That is a Flower Mound water line project. So they've got a water line that's right along inside the TxDOT right of way. They're relocating that line. And that's what that is. So that's what that black pipe you see sitting out there. So,
thanks.
yeah.
Any more questions?
I have one more just out of curiosity. What is your projected timeline on this? I know it totally depends on demand but what are you?
Yeah, 7 to 10 years,
Okay, for full build out for all 5?
correct,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Hopefully faster.
What are those, is there kind of an average? I understand we can't do anything, I'm just curious. What are the lot sizes in?
50 foot wide, 60 foot wide, 70 foot wide, and 80 foot wide.
110 deep.
120 to 130. So, yeah.
Was that per acre?
No, that's, width of the lot, if you're facing the home on the street, that's how wide the
No,
street.
I understand
Okay.
that.
Is that like
It's like an 8,
Oh,
just
sorry,
8
sorry.
to like a 10th to almost a half acre. That's kind of the mix that are right there. Yeah.
But I missed that. What'd you say?
It's about an 1/8, 10th to an 1/8 of an acre up to almost a half an acre on some of the lots. Yep,
Thank you. I noticed some of them were bigger.
yes.
Sorry, just another curious question. So are these technically Bartonville residents that will be in there?
No, it'll be like Lantana. Again, you're a county resident, you live in the mud, you live in High Plain, but you do not live in Bartonville.
Oh.
No,
With the mud, do they end up eventually with some kind of, like the fresh water district runs Lantana, is that the same kind of thing
Yes,
with the mud? So they do have some representation when they.
absolutely.
Good, they won't be coming and crying with us.
That's what I was wondering. But do we get tax revenue?
no,
No,
Okay, all right.
that's the one thing, since we don't have any control, we don't get any revenue, so.
well, not too bad. Where are we? Any more questions or concerns? Here's your chance.
My concern is that road because I live on Jeter and I just see that road. Construction or whatever, someone's gonna have to say, oh, that has to be open, we can't get in and out. I just totally disagree with that road. That's my only.
Well,
I understand it as an emergency option, but I think it needs to be removed.
Well, would you address that? It's really the fire department's deal, not theirs.
That is correct. So Heinz has worked to, basically adhere to the agreement they have with the town of Bartonville. This issue has been continually pressed by ESD1, and we've continued to negotiate something that does not violate intent of the agreement that council negotiated would still provide some access, so we're continuing to work through that process.
Does that mean we should be making signs and go pick at the ESD?
Actually, Thad told me to behave. So I'm just, so I'm being honest. I just think it needs to be removed when the subdivision is completed, completely removed.
So back to Brenda's point, can there be a condition or a timeline that that road would have to cease to exist?
Again, that would be part of the agreement drafted that all parties agree to, so again, a condition could be when that access point off 1171 is created. That satisfies that separation of entry points into the subdivision, that would be eliminated. Again, everybody's got to agree to it, Bartonville included, if that happens. Liberty Christian may say, no, we still want it. I don't know yet until we get that drafted and before council to consider, because again, we have an agreement in place with Hines that we've got to ensure that council feels that this meets that intent. Before we really negotiate anything. So we are, as Jason pointed out, we kind of diverge a little bit here with the ESD one. We don't like to air those things, but we have difficulty, as staff, we have difficulty providing emergency solutions through Bartonville to places not in Bartonville unless they've also been considered through those other entities. So again, for Argyle, the school city in Argyle, as ESD looked at other possibilities of accessing behind Liberty Christian through Argyle. So again, that we have just a difference of opinion there on how to straight grass.
And I'm guessing that if you didn't have to mess with a fence and gate up there, you just assume no.
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah. We would just stick to the temporary.
I mean, I understand and want, your subdivision to have emergency access. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that once it's there, I don't want it going cars going down Peter.
Understood.
Totally.
Like I said, we're committed right now to the EFD for the two, in the town, to the 2 points of access, so right off the 360, that's
Including,
just.
yeah, that meets our standard.
Yeah, our standard
And
and
fire standard and fire, yes. They're simply wanting something additional.
Yeah, that's just the that's just the ESD's. You know, obviously, it's not necessarily Hines in first families, it's really the
Right.
ESD pushing it, so obviously we're. Trying to work with everybody and come up with a solution that the town, everybody could agree to, right? So, but if there's conditions that have to be laid on it, sure, yeah.
Okay, so our job is to make a decision on what's before you, recommending approval or not recommending approval or recommending approval with the conditions that we have before you. And that, if you put those back up on the screen,
Those are listed on page 10 of the package.
do you have a packet? Oh,
It's on your.
oh, yeah, mine's over here.
Down here.
So,
Quick question, waiver or concerning of a waiver before the intersection. Is that something we consider granting the waiver? Okay.
So it's included in your packet, but that'll be a council decision.
we don't,
So we should be recommending approval except for item number 10. No.
Ed, is there anything that we've missed or you think we need to
No.
take into consideration?
Nothing more than holding.
Are you ready to make a motion?
Do we want to add anything about trying to close that gate after the subdivision is completed?
That's condition number 4.
But it's not removing it.
Now that 4 is actually Smooth Road, that's they've.
There's
got
nothing to
to-
remove that access as
I
after
tying
the
that to
subdivision.
this plat because it doesn't attach, tying this to the preliminary plat would not be appropriate, that'd be a separate agreement. Because it doesn't even touch.
Okay,
there.
thank you.
Or something
I did
else.
not mean to bring it up then.
Good question.
My bad.
Okay, I believe we have,
Recommend approval with the conditions
from page 10, accepting, number 10.
We have a motion to recommend approval with the 10 conditions, leaving out item 10, which drops it to 10 conditions. Do I have a second?
I'll say.
All in favor? Unanimous. Okey dokey. Oops, never mind. You had a month off, didn't you?
You just
You
did
did
it.
tell
I don't like to spoil you like that again.
Moving on to number 2. Item number 2 is discussion about if y'all can live with 6:30, or if you feel we need to go back to 7. Little discussion.
That's very good.
6:30 was fine with me.
Yeah, 6:30 works out.
Me too.
When we tried to do it before, there were several people on. That it's gonna be difficult for them to do it, so we didn't use it before, but everybody did it.
And if there would be a meeting time, I mean, like a specific reason why we couldn't get a quorum at 6:30, but we could at 7, we could certainly make an exception on a single meeting, but at this point, consider the bulk of the meetings be at 6:30. Do I have a motion?
Motion to accept 6:30 times moving forward.
Second? All in favor? There you go.
Very much.
Future items.
We have, is that, I don't think Anderson, is Anderson coming? What's that? Would Anderson come here or then go straight to council?
We'll speak in council over at the street council, otherwise there goes chance.
We do have a delay on, Knight's Crest. Excuse me, Knight's Landing. That subdivision is pulling back. They think they would like to go gated private road access, so they've got to retool everything. On their preliminary plan.
Which one?
Off of Jeter, East Jeter.
The turkey ranch.
Turkey Ranch.
The smaller one or the larger?
The larger one, and the one that's actually a subdivision, the other one's a family compound, the one that would be a subdivision. Very
We
little,
looked at it.
yeah, they'd have to come back through again, creating that, HOA lot for the gate and then designating all of the streets and, removing those easements because the town will not maintain anything in that. They're anticipating $6 to $7 million per home. And so they decided they would like to gate.
And at that point, then, probably don't have to worry about the cost of it. 5 acres, is that required cement? I don't think it is.
No, it's not required, but I think they're doing cement. They resubmitted to Chad, he's approved cement through there. It's not, 5 acre lots is not required. But Deer Hollow also did concrete on their 5 acre lots. I guess when you're building homes that size, they like the concrete streets. I wouldn't know. Just making an assumption.
Nice, very nice.
Well, at this point, we have completed the agenda and we will adjourn this meeting at 7:21.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So it's good presentation. Best of luck.
We appreciate it. What's your name? I'm sorry. I couldn't see you.
Yeah, I've been watching your video
She's bad on that sound.
and all the others.
We're just doing it to be known.
Okay.
Not like you guys right now. So. There was a big friend here. And we were doing that. We lost it. And we're in. And they sort of bought some in a good way. So.
You talked to Julie there, she doesn't want to.
No.